Welcome back to Beyond Hybrid. Phil Kirshner is here with us today. He is someone that I am honored to call someone I look up to as a thought leader, someone I respect as a colleague, and someone who has become a personal friend. Phil, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks, Dave. Always happy.
Now, you did make the joke, how can we not use that word anymore? And we're going to talk about that to some degree today. But yeah, the intention of this platform is to try to look a little bit around what's going on today. And so I just want to kick things off and just ask you a somewhat broad question. What is the main message that you think workplace leaders need to hear right now, and why should they care?
That is a great question. And just to be clear, because when you say workplace leaders, I think you and I both lean a little bit into someone who is ultimately responsible for the built environment, right? There are lots of folks around HR who might call themselves a workplace leader, but are not so
Mm,
directly responsible for the execution of that in a physical sense, right? So if we keep an eye on like real estate and workplace leaders, what do they need to hear now? The challenge of our time is going to be a more thoughtful design or redesign of work. Much more intention about like how things are done, by who, when, with what tools, like where is AI in the mix, where are full-time employees in the mix or fractional gig freelance employees in the mix. And if you're going to be much more intentional about how the work is done, you then have to be much more intentional about where that work is done and how that space, to the extent that you control it, should be designed. And that's a big difference from the historical approach of I have to assume that lots of work of all shapes and sizes happens here in this thing that I have to build. So I'm going to go after the low-hanging fruit, the least common denominator, to try to make it as good for as many things as possible. And it never really was, right? Before COVID, there's always
mhm.
something to complain about. But in theory, if the work is much more intentional, the who, what, where, when, why, then the space is going to be much more intentional and solving for fewer purposes with an openness to knowing that if the spaces you control don't solve for that purpose, you can and should direct someone somewhere else.
Hmm. You can and should direct someone somewhere else. I'm lingering on that.
And that's
What does that
the,
what does that mean to you? Yeah, like how does that look? And
wait, yeah, I I always tell a fairly simple anecdote, I guess, like from core WeWork time when I was there, which like our headquarters was a disaster from a oversubscription perspective. Like
mhm,
too many people, the company was growing too fast. There were definite moments of having, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, like 4 to 1, maybe oversubscription of people
mm,
in one of the several buildings that we would call headquarters. But that
mhm,
really forced not quite an explicit hanging of a sign on the door, but in the what was called the like intergalactic headquarters in Chelsea, in New York City, where I and most of my team worked. It was amazing for kind of, you know unsticking problems, for client growth, for product strategy, for access to executives. But it was a terrible place to be if you were like in spreadsheet mode.
mhm, mhm,
And there wasn't really a sign, as I said, like on the door, but it was very well understood. If you're trying to do one of these functions where this place is not great, you should go somewhere else. Like, we're not gonna, we organizational are not really going to tolerate the complaint that you can't sort of do focused work here.
mhm,
We have a quiet space, which is as good as we can possibly make it. It was beautiful and very popular, but there's 5 WeWorks, saying nothing of any other option, within a quarter mile of where we were.
mhm.
Other HQs, your home, like an extremely mobile population. So it was just culturally okay. Like if you're doing something that doesn't necessitate the energy and the design what's happening here, you can go somewhere else. That's fine.
Yeah, I love that. I There seems to be so much tension or friction to be able to apply that cultural thinking to most Fortune 500 companies. Like right now, they're dealing with way more space than they have people that can come
Yeah.
in. So it's the exact opposite equation of what was going on at WeWork from that perspective. And then the other thing that I take note of is that there's this core belief, it seems, that culture equals the branded office of that particular employer. In other words, like there's more, it seems romanticism from my perspective that they must actually exist within the confines of one of those spaces. Where when you describe that WeWork proposition, it feels a little bit less romantic about it. It's a WeWork, and maybe I'm wrong about that. But in order to facilitate what you're describing, like go somewhere else and have that be a cultural norm, most companies are just not set up to be able to facilitate that for their employees. And I guess where I'm going with this is like there seems to be so many barriers to being able to achieve these kinds of things. And you and me have sat, we were literally at a conference in New York City a few weeks ago and looking at each other being like, we're having the same conversation about amenities and BS. Like, how do we incrementally move the needle on some of this stuff when these ships are so
Yeah.
huge and so hard to turn and like,
Yeah, yes, they're huge. And the challenge for all of this is about holding more than one thing at the same time, right?
mm,
It's not an or, it's an and. And to unpack what you sort of prompted there, a few things come to mind. One, there was a colleague of mine at McKinsey who used to tell clients something delightfully on the order of, your office, like signage and the branding and all. It's like, it's marketing. It's not culture. And
mm,
if you were relying on the signs on the wall to glue your culture together, you had a deeper issue like below the surface that was festering, and COVID just showed you that it was there, that people weren't really that connected to what you were doing, didn't really have clarity over their roles, or couldn't see the connection between sort of what they're doing and strategic vision for the company. So that's one. Like a lot of it was sort of cultural confetti, and
mm,
we were being managed and indoctrinated culturally by the law of averages. Like I see a lot of branding, I see a lot of signs all the time, great. But as soon as I'm blindfolded or put in my house, it all falls apart. Like that's not great.
mm-hmm,
And then you get to the wisdom. Not only we work back in the day, but most of the fully remote, if not remote or virtual or digital first companies who are like, yeah, being together and being in certain places has an impact, but it does not have to be every day. We work also, some people would come and visit our, not just a normal we work, but our office. And actually we're surprised to find out that we didn't like give free lunch,
mm,
because they were thinking like, oh, tech firm, you've got this tech firm googly sort of attitude. Why aren't you giving free everything like they do? I'm like, that's not the vibe here. We do have some ritualized bits of culture, something they used to call like "Thank God It's Monday" (TGIM). So there would be free dinner at the end of the day on Mondays, early on, and then famously summer camp, which was like, let's go all out and get everybody together in a multi-day, more meaningful and personal way that sort of fills your karma cup or your
mm-hmm,
trust batteries or whatever you want to call it for several months, not just in sort of cultural indoctrination, but how connected you feel to other people, how willing you are to even like solve difficult problems or say hard things to someone. But if I've hung out in a field with you for 2 days,
mm-hmm,
many months later, I can call you up and say, like, why are you late on this deadline? What the hell is going on? But by the
mm,
way, we're cool on a deeply personal level. And so it doesn't have to be every day. And then interestingly, I just was listening to a podcast yesterday or the day before that was interviewing Michael, I think his last name is Morrison, who wrote the book Tribal.
mm-hmm,
And he said something really interesting that about The Office in the interview, which was that, even through COVID, right, like going to the same place all the time applies not just culture, but structure and expectation. This is what we have to do here. But when executives or teams forever pre-COVID wanted to have out of the box thinking, what did we do? we left.
Yeah, you went somewhere else.
You went
Yeah.
somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I actually think now with the pace of change increasing, there's a benefit of that micro mobility or letting people fluctuate between like individual heads down productivity, which often at home or someplace of their choice is better.
Hmm.
Sort of corporate rhythms, which
Hmm.
maybe could happen in a place that you control or design, where there is some benefit to the routine, not necessarily for culture, but for the routine and the process. But also encouraging people to go meet and interact in other places, not just it's convenient for them, but they may actually spark new ideas or tackle new problems because they're outside of the box that they're usually stuck in.
Yeah. Yeah. What you make me think about when you say all this is I recognize in retrospect that I took a lot of relationships for granted that I had in my days going to the office every day. Is sort of that notion of like, you live with your partner every day. You're shoveling shit, you're feeling, like you're going through life together, right? And you can then take for granted that person. And sometimes you actually need to like, leave your home life and go somewhere else, even if it's just like to a coffee date at some place at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. It's a standing opportunity for you to have no phones and just have a relationship. What I find in retrospect is that I took a lot of the relationships for granted that I saw every day. And it almost felt like that much sort of proximity to one another was detrimental in a sense. Um, and then I think about like traditionalist views of serendipity. And I saw a comment on LinkedIn the other day that said, there might not be a lot of serendipity happening in the office, but there's absolutely zero serendipity happening online. And I didn't really agree with that statement, but I'm not here to really give my opinion. I'm more curious what you think about that notion of taking it all for granted and this notion of serendipity and how
Yeah.
we achieve it.
All credit due to my friend Greg Lindsay, who I saw not that long ago here in New York. He wrote an article for the Times, I think it was, maybe 12 years ago. I don't know, something along that, called Engineering Serendipity.
Hmm.
And that topic has probably come back up more times through more of my roles in more conversations on and off. This lingering curiosity about like, can you, can't you design the water cooler effect?
Hmm.
And he cited some of the older examples famously where things Apple or certain companies would require everyone to come in or out of the same door, or certainly worked on a lot of workplace projects where companies will deliberately put different amenities in different places. Like not every pantry has the same thing. If you want the good coffee, you got to go over here. But if you want the free bananas, you got to go over there. And that's just like
Hmm.
creating movement
Hmm.
physically in the environment.
Hmm.
And I believe that most traditional office environments don't contribute to serendipity because people are creatures of habit. They sit with their own teams. I know
Hmm.
that activity based or other forms of like unassigned seating programs, when done properly, will usually get like 30-40% increases in the number of staff who say that they meet or interact with different people. So that
Hmm.
I attribute to sort of serendipity. And pre-COVID, you started to see people really trying to take a run at using small digital signals as a way to do that on a really small scale. Things like the Donut app in Slack, we used to
Hmm.
use that at
Yeah.
WeWork. GitLab famously used it with the idea that in the early days, everybody participates. This is a cultural thing, which means you could be 5 weeks on the job as like a social media analyst, and then you get paired with the CEO, and the CEO is gonna show up to your little donut meeting. Like that was
Hmm.
his culture he was putting in as a way of finding potential friends. Early COVID also was the explosion of lunch club, at least here. I don't know what other cities that was in. I think it started just before COVID, but I remember in the first year doing the like random lottery virtual coffee chats with
Hmm.
one or two people a week with an intent to find people who are overlap. And I'm still in touch with some of them, which is funny. And last but not least, the I think individuals can create serendipity and opportunity for themselves by uh, like working out loud, which is a phrase from a guy named John Pepper.
Mm,
Putting what you do or what you want like out into the open to be discovered. And LinkedIn is a great example of that, right?
I love that. Hmm.
Where people tend to find each other. But
Hmm.
now going forward, the real benefit of sort of personal AI agents is the engineering the serendipity bit a little, right? Like, can my little co-pilot tell me some needle in the haystack thing that I would never have figured out in my organization of 50,000 people about someone else who's struggling with the same thing that I am or that I have been, Maybe we're like the two highest consumers of the same help documentation internally for the
Mm.
same problem. And just being like, you two are trying to solve the same thing. You should be friends. And we're pretty quick at the speed dating effect. Like, I'll know really fast if I actually want to hang out with you. But those sort of nudges, I think, will start to accelerate and take away the administrative burden of finding those people, right? And we could just go back to being human, like trying to see these relationships that matter. So it may finally be possible in the world of workforce and workplace nudge tech, so to speak.
I like about all this. So the first one is a little bit more self-explanatory. You put things in a physical environment and disperse them so that
Yeah.
you force people to coalesce in different areas and ultimately do the job for them of, creating, facilitating a serendipitous moment. Because I actually tend to agree, like, it's incredibly rare for a serendipitous moment to just like magic happen. Like there usually needs to be some form of set preconditions and thought around how that can come to be. What you made me realize when you talk about living your work out loud, um, I think a small number of people, and you and me are both two of those people, are willing to just go do that, and then we facilitate our own serendipity, i.e., we meet and collide with one another on the internet. But your suggestion around the AI nudge, I think, is the equivalent of putting the bananas over here and the coffee over here, because I think ultimately we can't rely on people creating those outcomes for themselves, and that's the inherent irony of it. It's like you need to help nudge them along, whether it's a banana here, coffee there, or an AI being able to say, like, you two share the same problem, you should hang out.
Yeah. And my team spent a lot of time at WeWork trying to understand how to correlate the role of the flexible workplace and the WeWork atmosphere had on innovation. And I remember sort of metaphor thinking about it in like uh, building a fire of sorts. Like you gotta create, you build the logs, right? You build your little stack, and
Mm-hmm.
you've got like kindling, and then ultimately you need some sort of spark. And the idea, like I write about some topic all the time, or I participate in internal forums and I share my problems. I'm just like putting things out there that the spark might be, a friend of yours sees something that I ask or write, and it's like, I know someone, like you two should talk, right? But you've got to create that condition.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that is perceived historically as like creative, a creative pursuit, a creative discovery, can't just be put into the world by one person. It takes like others to notice, to recognize, to elevate, to connect. So it just starts with like, how do people know what you're thinking about?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. Okay.
And I mean, although the real problem here, like not the problem, the biggest challenge is uh, it isn't natural for a lot of people to do this. So you've got to have managers who see the power in that and are like modeling the behavior or telling your team, I want you to like take the random walk. I want you to participate in this forum, or I'm going to lob things at you that I see out there in this forum for you. And I'm not just doing it for fun. Like I think there's a benefit of us building our social capital, building, greater base of ideas or ways of getting help for things.
Yeah, I dig it. Okay. I want to ask you about something that I'm going to at least say you've become famous for. And it is on your, what is it, your background photo on LinkedIn? What do we call that? The banner. It's on your banner. And it says, what does it say? The future workplace will be virtual first, but not placeless. And I love this statement because it's open ended enough to be interpreted in many different ways. And I love that. And you're really great at creating a lot of story arcs. And so recently you went on to actually offer one of those interpretations at Workspaces in Austin. And you caught my attention again with it when you made a post about it on LinkedIn. And you said, one day we'll receive nudges to travel to a nearby workspace to use immersive technologies that make it feel like you're having coffee with someone halfway around the world. But you then went on to articulate that there's a lot of friction that has employees throwing their hands in the air going, well, I don't want to take that nudge. So like, I think we all know what the North Star is. We get nudged to be in the right place at the right time with the right people and the right tools, and we're just there and it's blissful. But I guess my question to you is, what's missing right now from a mindset and from a practical perspective to be able to make that reality kind of pull that future forward faster? Because I think we're all feeling exhausted by the lack of change. Like we got shown the future, it got lifted because of COVID, and now we're like sitting here watching things incrementally not move. And I think that's what creates some of the frustration out there in
Yeah.
this whole
Yeah. Yeah.
discourse.
Yeah. Look, some of it is just straight schedule problems, right? Like we were all overscheduled and had too many meetings before COVID. COVID made it worse, made it much worse. And I always, literally the closest book to where I'm sitting here on my desk is this one, which is A World Without Email.
Oh my God.
From
What a world.
Oh,
What a world that would be.
world. This book is so fabulous. But it really just makes the point that, again, pre-COVID, we have never, we create like busy work for ourselves. And we're constantly checking our inboxes and constantly looking for that dopamine hit. Like, am I busy? Am I busy? Am I busy? And it's not good. And you should have fewer meetings. They should be better. You should be more prescriptive about tools and generally create space. That's also why you've got books. The same guy wrote Deep Work or books like Flow. This is not new. We are cognitively not designed for this task switching that we do all the time, right? But I don't think this is new. So you should have a schedule that is filled with 7 or 8 to 15 back-to-back half-hour Zoom calls every day. Like that is not a good sign. Even when I was at McKinsey, wrote a book called, and I didn't write, McKinsey wrote a book called Power to the Middle, which showcased like the staggering percentage of your average manager's time that's spent on administrative crap. So that it's taking away from them like coaching and leading and improving. But that simple, just step one, if you told me on a normal work week, right? You're like, hey, I'm going to be in New York tomorrow, unexpectedly. Last minute client thing. Here I am, like I'm on a plane. Do you want to have coffee? For most people in most organizations, it's like preposterous.
Yeah.
That is an outrageous thing. Like with sub 24 hours notice. And we should aspire to a world where there is space in the calendar for flexibility, not just in a like I would like to go pick up my kid today sense, or I was out late at a client event last night, so I want to sleep a little bit more this morning so I can be functional. Like that baseline human flexibility, but also the like opportunity flexibility.
I love that.
That person from another team who's here, or yes, like odd things that pop up. So that they might feel urgent and that they're unexpected, but to say, yeah, like it's not wild that in any given day I have some give. And it's not give that requires pushing 10 other people in meetings out of the way. It's just, I was going to do that one thing this afternoon myself or with this other group, and like, we'll just slide it for an hour. With all these tools, I forget what they're called. The ones that will like automatically jumble your meetings around or calendars. There's all this stuff exists to help clean up in the background, but you just need to have space. It's those the little number puzzles I always think of, like when you're a kid, it's like one, two, three, 1 through 8, and is
That's
missing 9. It's like missing the one box so you can slide the numbers around and
mhm.
reorder them. I don't know what you call those, but that's you've got to have space in the schedule to do anything.
It's so interesting you say that, Phil, because literally lately, my daughter, we've been giving her this holiday calendar, and instead of it having chocolate in it, it has these little books, and they might be like crosswords or mazes or whatever. And when we come home from school, she lives in the like the liminal space. Like her whole life is just in that in between. We can do
Yeah.
anything at any time, right? And she's just like that when we get home. I want to like sit and have a little party and do these things together. And all she really wants to do is do an activity beside me doing an activity. She's okay to do independent activities, but just that we're there together doing it. And I have to fight that tension of like, well, honey, I got to make you dinner. I gotta get you to bed, like blah blah blah, right? And I think that yeah, you're tugging on the massive opportunity of further technological enablement, which is actually to just free up our time. But what you make me realize though is that we live in a go-go culture. We live in a like, what are we, measuring this quarter, this month, like, and I think that like leads to this meeting culture that we have because we constantly feel like we need to do the next thing as fast as humanly possible. When you look at like blue zones, by example, they're just inching their life along, milking the goat, taking care of this, that, walking up and down flights of stairs to get healthy. And they're not worried about next quarter. Like life just happens until life isn't happening anymore. And I don't know how we solve that conundrum in North American society, but I think that that's at the core of it.
I agree. Look, it's not easy, but even for doing that will make the thing that I'm not going to say out loud easier. The H word, we can call it. But it is also necessary to really embrace the power of AI and similar tools in coaching and administering you and your work, uh, to have that kind of flexibility. It all comes back to more of a culture of writing things down, which goes to what you cited on like virtual first. That just means the default is to written and asynchronous,
Mm,
which is helpful not only for flexibility, but also to let your personal copilot, because it
mm.
does not yet know literally what you're thinking and is not in every meeting that you're in the hallways. But for people who don't believe it or don't value it now, I try to draw more attention to this skills based resourcing and skills based organization future that we will also get to, in part because of AI, where uh, getting away from traditionally boxes and lines, like I only do this one thing, and into more of a mindset of gigs and assignments, may even create capacity to get more work done by farming out and like tapping into latent demand for people who have cycles internally or want to learn something internally. And still that is another version of opportunistic flexibility. um, at silly example, there was this constant culture. If people were so-called on the beach between assignments, someone like me might say, listen, I've got this idea rattling around in my head. There's something I want to do. It is super not urgent. But if there's anyone out there with some like brain cycles this week and you want to put your hand up and learn something or work with me on something to get some exposure, just let me know. And a real culture, people think, yeah, yeah, I'm good. Like, it's not, you're not asking for a full time thing. And especially it's not urgent. So I'll give you some time. And I just think they're related. That can you make time tomorrow to see someone who's unexpectedly here? Or do you want to participate or help with something tomorrow related to the topic or the skill that you've been trying to learn or get more exposure to? The answer should be yes.
Yeah, I love it. The inner thing that's happening in my head as you're speaking, as I go, Bill gets it, but the mountain ahead of having a culture that is average in North American corporate society where like that's how people are behaving, um, feels feels like a big climb. And
Yes. And well, that was
that,
the whole Austin talk, right? Just, I think
yeah,
we can all imagine the Minority Report, like flying car, Jetsons
yeah,
super future.
flying cars, you did it that
Yeah.
way.
Well, but we can, right? If I told you one day
Yeah.
cars will fly, I think anyone, any adult in our society who's seen a movie ever, right, would be like, yeah, it seems like science fiction, but it is. There are people working on the problem now,
Hmm.
so it's gonna happen one day, right? Flying taxis, this and that. It will happen. Will it happen soon? No, but we are aligned on the general direction of travel of that kind of thing.
Hmm.
We are less aligned on the 5 to 10 year version.
Yeah.
That's the way we
Which,
get stuck. And
yeah,
if
well,
you
it's
if
easy to
you
think about that and you put it over there. You know what I mean? Like you're like, okay,
put
flying
it
cars,
over
let's just
there,
put it over there. But the like dealing with the here and now, it's just so you become apathetic to it. Like you,
yes. And like, look, I'm not an academic, and I keep looking in this direction, like my bookshelf filled with things saying like we have too many meetings and work is killing us and we can slow down and the magic of doing one thing at a time. But that's not new. But I think we're in this moment where it's got to be connected to this modern organization, fluid workforce, like AI powered, full flex everywhere opportunity.
mhm.
Like not just slowing down or having fewer meetings because it's good for you physiologically, because burnout's a problem and all that's a problem, but creating space in this world where the machine can help you see the needle in the haystack and help us like be better humans and find more opportunity. So you sort of have to do it. Otherwise you're going to get stuck in the H word forever.
The H word loop forever. Well, I was gonna ask you a question about the H world, but I'm actually gonna leave it because this conversation has been so productive that we can just leave it. But the thing that
Look,
I
I could
feel,
just say the reason I came up with, I think, I don't know, the whole virtual first bit was just to signal intention because the H word does not carry any intention with it. It's
mm,
just, it's like a description of the current state. It's like saying it's snowing. Like, great. It
yeah,
doesn't tell you how to behave.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
at best, you get into, I want you here this day or that day, but that's like still not enough.
Yeah, it's so interesting because yesterday or 2 days ago we had a storm here, PI, a snowstorm, and we were up at our cottage, and we were not thinking about the implications of what that snowstorm meant, and it became too dangerous to drive. And so that I really like that like example you just gave. It's like you look at it snowing and you go, well, that's just a thing that's happening. What are the implications of it, and how do you respond accordingly? Is kind of more the bigger thing. Um, I want to just ask you another broad question. Just so curious what comes into your head. What are you most pessimistic and most optimistic about for next year? Not flying cars, but what do you think is going to suck ass next year, and what do you think could be cool?
That try as we might, we will keep reading a lot about measuring work by inputs, like how often you're supposed to be aware. We will see more power struggles between executives and employees trying to assert who gets to make a decision. We will probably see more executives with a bit of egg on their face about that, and more public stories of companies saying like, yeah, we picked up a whole ton of talent from those guys because they pushed them all into the street and we're happy to take them. That's what I think we'll see, which is negative. And
That's the shit part. Okay. Yeah, what could be
yeah,
good? What
like
could be good? It's tough, honestly.
It's tough. I read something this morning, and I will not remember whose newsletter it was specifically, but just that they were likening the current moment for AI to like BitTorrent in the early days. And sure,
Mm,
you could like download music or movies in a like hack together,
yeah,
dark web, technical feeling kind of way. And it wasn't until like Spotify came along that things became mass market. Like AI, we will hopefully get there, start to see more like mass market adoption of things. So that actually we get away from saying AI. I've seen LinkedIn's like chief economist or something like that, Nish Raman, speak twice in this fall. He both times said some version of like, we don't say internet anymore. Like, I don't internet. I I buy things online, like, or I stream music. I stream music. That that will hopefully get to AI, like over that hump where we don't have to talk about AI. You just say like, yes,
yeah,
I
yeah.
say the thing you did, and be like, yeah, yeah, it's powered by AI. But then that will allow for more mass market adoption of those tips and techniques, and that hopefully we get away from being so rudderless. Like for all the hype about AI, you and I both see these studies still where your average employee is saying like, I'm not really being helped, or I don't see the forest for the trees, right? So like, it's just like, we got to do it. And it's maybe some part of the organization that is oriented on the AI impact of the outward facing product or service.
Hmm.
But that doesn't mean that it's happening internally.
Mm.
Uh, I've spoken to a number of like real estate workplace folks who will say, yeah, if you make, you make widgets, that the team that makes the widgets is all consumed now by the impact of AI on widget production. But that doesn't mean you're helping the accounting team, unsuck their meeting load with
Hmm.
new tools, right?
Hmm.
So hopefully we get a little bit more of that clearer change management and customer success internally on the role of these tools to help people with the transparency from leaders that's required to make them not afraid of it.
Love it. It's 11:11, Phil, which my wife has told me. It's 11:11 where I am, and that is apparently a sign from the angels. So, and I'm about to ask you a question about 25-year-old Phil. So maybe it's a sign.
God help us.
So, okay, here's my final question for you today. If Phil was 25 again, and he's entering the workplace arena in 2025, in the world that we live in today, what would you tell him he needs to be thinking about, and how would you coach him to be of value in a world that is becoming more virtual first, but not placeless? What does that young person need to be thinking about that's coming into our industry?
I think I think there's always been an attitude like, don't be afraid to disrupt. Like every new generation, like you've been exposed to things that I, as the boss, like I haven't been exposed to. Please drop some knowledge bombs on me, like for stuff that seems stupid. Like, I don't know if every 25-year-old in the workplace has been given that opportunity, but they should have been. I'm looking at you to tell me what's really
Yeah.
dumb about this.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I think back to the work design bit, like process mapping, process improvement, work design, that kind of intentionality to who, what, where, when is not a skill that is taught much, I don't think. And there was a real explosion of like user centricity in research, but I I could see it having is like almost process design and process mapping having a bit of a heyday in that if you want to be impactful, you want to come into my group and say, hey, the way we're doing something is stupid. In this moment, where you could really break down the role that systems we use, the tasks we do, the places we go, the rhythms of our group, the way we meet, the way we make decisions. This is a moment of intense opportunity for change, but if you want to connect with the leadership, Saudi Arabian leadership on the potential for that change, I think the language you have to speak is that kind of process orientation. This is the way we do it now. And these tools exist, or these things could be more flexible, instead of just saying like it's dumb.
Mm.
There's maybe like a language and a skill set there that is less commonly taught. It's like, oh, you got to learn to code. Oh, you have to learn this and that. But like an architectural thinking for work is less common. And I would tell someone, don't be afraid to interrogate it, but you have to be able to really like enumerate it out, like write down how is something done, so that you can then look for improvements and how to blow it apart and put it back together again in different ways and with different people and different systems.
That is a good place to end, my friend. That is a good place to end. What I really appreciate about you, well, is your thoughtfulness. But for someone that is focused on the world of place, your perspective just goes so much farther and so much wider, and it's rare. And I couldn't think of a better person to talk to about what's beyond hybrid.
IRL.
Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it.